Yeah.
Anna Chong, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. How would you introduce yourself, Anna?
So my name's Anna. I came from Hong Kong originally, but came to New Zealand in 1988, and I did architecture in architecture school here in Auckland. And I'm a senior principal in Chow Architects now, and I'm leading the health team.
Wonderful. So one of your specialties is healthcare design,
Yeah.
and you've been doing it for a while, and that's one of your focuses. I'm really interested to know what got you into healthcare design, why you specialize in it, and what are some of the things that you've begun to appreciate about this field?
Interestingly, I mean, when people ask me this question, I actually stumble onto it, to be honest. So I've got a passion about people. So I did architecture not because of the iconic building or, obviously design is important, but to me the fabric or the actual piece of whatever form you call it, it's not the most important thing, it's the people that's using it. So I did architecture because I wanted to build community. I wanted to specialize in helping people. So actually I did, in those days we had architecture and you did 5 years, only get a bachelor. So I actually went to the UK and I did a master's in housing studies for developing country, affordable housing, building community. And at that time, I sort of really wanted to do this, and we were actually really, really lucky at that time. And it was right after the downfall of the apartheid policy. So went down to Cape Town and Black Township and did a bit of field research. So there's a whole thing that I wanted to do, about, doing research, building community and things like that. But anyway, did all this and then actually got a job offer in Singapore about housing, affordable housing. And then decided to, I don't know why, decided to spend some time with the family, so went back to Hong Kong for a few years. And I didn't like it at all because it's very commercial, learn a lot, but so I came back to New Zealand thinking, I'm just going into housing in New Zealand, going to do affordable housing and stuff like this. I'm talking about the 90s, wasn't actually the case. It was very different from what I was looking at. So it was like, what do I want to do? So a friend of mine said, Chow who's looking for a contractor. So I thought, okay, go for it. And I signed up for a 3-month contract. The contract was the first project in health that I sort of encountered. And that was Middlemore in the Kids First Hospital. So I was helping the interior designer to sort of finish up the ward design, or, not the ward design, but the more of interior kind of aspect of it. And sort of got into healthcare at that time. And then from a 3-month contract, I was there for 7 years. And then I left for 4 years, and then I came back for another 15 now. So that was that kind of opportunity that I went into healthcare. I thought, okay, if I'm not doing I'm not doing housing in New Zealand at that time, affordable housing, what do I want to do? And then the whole thing about actually health design, it's actually designing for people. The user group consultation, which is actually very similar to the things I did in the UK when, facilitating and group kind of workshop. It's just the skill set gel, but also the value. So then I thought, I'll do this. And that's how I become a healthcare specialist.
Yeah. Was there much of an upgrade in terms of the skills? You talked about some of the skills like consultation and some more of the soft side of things. But technically, was there a big jump?
Yes.
Or a big shift?
I think part of the interesting thing about healthcare is like you have to sort of constantly exercise both sides of your brain. So as people, but also very technically difficult. It's not like that you can dream up a concept, you can, but then you have to make it work. How do you make it work? And especially we're in New Zealand with the seismic constraint and seismic design thing, and it's adding many, many layers of complexity to a building. So yes, technically you have to, obviously you learn it by mistakes, by research, by your colleague, learning from your colleagues and learning from a lot of involvement in terms of that learning. Yeah, you have to upskill.
Yeah. Well, that's quite an interesting point that you make with healthcare being relatively a lot more governed compared to other sectors of the industry. How do you balance that with the need for a bit more compassionate consideration of the people
You're
that you're
asking a
dealing
lot of
with?
really good questions. Yes, it's just hard. Firstly, the building has to be functional. There's a lot of functionals and a lot of, functions, a lot of, like say, if it's a theatre, the theatre has to be a theatre. And everything, every piece of supporting steel, every piece of services had to be well done, right? If not, you can't do the thing. And I would say, the kind of compassion, it's coming from, if you look at a patient or the family journey, it starts from there. So you come into the hospital, what do you see? How do you make your waiting area or your consultation, spaces more friendly? Or how do you make, say, children's hospital, how do you make it more sort of less anxious, for the kids? That starts from there. And then the journey of, meeting the clinicians, repeating, coming back for follow-up, and even down to the bunkers when you're doing radiation therapy, right? It's quite scary. So you go through the maze and really, like you walk through the maze, go through, it's like, oh my gosh, that's quite terrible. So what do you do, along the maze? We are putting some good mural stuff and then LED lighting and things kind of that's just add to it. I don't think you can take away the whole anxiety or the kind of, you can't, we try to lighten or make it more easier for people to come into hospital, and because it could be quite daunting.
Yeah.
Right? That's that. Yeah. And then also the public spaces. In New Zealand, we don't do it as well, to be honest, but I have this vision, or some sort of dream, one day you think about it, you come to the hospital. I think Singapore did it very well, and in some places in Melbourne, they do it very well. It's like you come into hospital actually not just because of treatment. In Japan, do it quite well, in some of the community hospital. You actually come into hospital with other stuff. I think one of the projects I've seen in Japan, they got the community involved, and so people actually coming for like study rooms, library in the hospital. And so you sort of make it like a community space. And that could be one thing, because then you come along and it's like, no, you're sick, you go to hospital. But actually you can go to hospital, even if you have a better cafe, imagine, that people coming into hospital actually can grab coffee. That would be very different from, I'm going to see a doctor only, So that is like that kind of stuff. I suppose also the other thing is the architecture itself can make it less daunting. But the problem is that you have to balance between the functionality. You can't just have like completely off, no grit, no like rigid kind of thing, because but there are a lot of things we could do. Yeah, but of course we're limited by budget. And sadly, the functional things always take priority, and which is fine. So whatever we can do, we try to sort of make it better. I think I was talking to you about the reception, but actually, interestingly, it's actually the first point of contact when you get into it, how it actually looks like, how you actually make it feel that you're more welcome. Actually does help. Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember when my granddad was sick and Dad spent weeks in the hospital, both in Dubai and in India. This was at different phases. It was just so taxing on him as well. I mean, he wouldn't talk about it, but it's just seeing these spaces that someone's in, having to sit on an uncomfortable chair, and all you're staring at is white tiles for weeks and weeks on end. And someone that you care about and you really want to be in that space. It's not just the patients, but their support structure around them as well, which sometimes can be so much more influential on them than all the other people that they meet.
Absolutely. I mean, a few years back, before my dad passed away, he was going through surgery, and I remember in this hospital was like one of the top hospital in Hong Kong. You pay gazillions of dollars, but I remember seeing, watching. In New Zealand we do it much better, much more sort of people focused. We have like whānau room or family rooms or meeting interview rooms where we break bad news. It's terrible to say, but it's actually, But I remember I was there, like we said, looking at the blank wall, walking up and down the corridor, what else can you do? As a surgeon breaking bad news to a whole family in the corridor. That's actually, if you look at that, it's just quite you can't really use the word inhumane, but in a way it is, you know, like because and then you saw family like squatting down, crying, and in the public space. It's quite scary, right? So if you have even an alcove off that long corridor, you know, that you can have some partition that people can have some sort of privacy, it will be much better, right?
Just these very simple design decisions that can make your experience, at least in that case, bearable when it comes down to that.
Yeah, it's just so true. Or just like, oh my gosh, you know, you think, like what you say, it's already quite a lot on the family, and everyone focus on the patient, which is you should be, but the family supporting person actually, it's very difficult, and if you have some space to stay for overnight or some space, more comfortable chairs, then you can at times read a book, or when your patient doesn't need you, you can just at least, you know, do something on your phone that you sort of get yourself distracted from. That will be actually quite helpful.
Yeah, you don't want the person who's influencing the patient's outcome or their mindset to have a bad experience, and then that affects your healthcare. Right?
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of projects that you've done in New Zealand or elsewhere that might have employed some of these strategies?
I would say that, you know, not our project, but the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne was amazing, because they got, like, if you Google it, they got a three levels of aquarium, and looked after by the Melbourne Aquarium, I think, and then they have the waiting spaces with animals, like outdoor, and they actually look after by the zoo of Melbourne. So it's a very, very famous, everyone knows about it, it's a meerkat. So real meerkat in the outdoor courtyard space, so right outside next to the children's waiting room. So I went there with my daughter, trying to see how it is. She was quite young at that time. She went in, the first thing is meerkat. Forgotten that, I mean, obviously she wasn't a patient, but you can see other kids there looking at the meerkat, trying to sort of see what's going on. And then the parents can be waiting and reading a book or chatting to each other, having a coffee, because the kids are in the meerkat, rather than imagine a normal kind of waiting. The kids will be, what am I going to do, Mum? What's the next thing? You know, freaking out, and the whole thing will be a very different kind of environment. The vibe will be very different. So that was quite cool, you know. So even my daughter's just like, she didn't think, it even click to her that was a hospital, because the aquarium and the zoo thing is more like an outing. And it's quite interesting because a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, lives there, and she said her niece's family, the niece has a chronic disease, so they always have to go back into hospital. And she said before this was done, every time, a week before the appointment, become like family kind of disaster. She'll be counting the days, going back to the appointment, blah blah blah. It's all this kind of hoo-ha in the family, and stress in the you know, for the parents. Since that was built, the appointment moved to that. It's like an outing. Yeah. When is my appointment? When am I going to see the fish? When am I going to see the meerkat? Yeah. That's one of the examples I think I can give. It's interesting, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it provides a peace from mind in a way. Like you're distracted, but well, at least you're not thinking about the devastating thing that's happening to someone that you love. Or if you're someone that's going through it, then it's a bit of a moment where you are able to breathe for a second. Yeah,
and also you think about it when the child grew up in the future, when she's like, you know, relating or rethinking about her childhood experience, instead of all the terrible experience, her memory will be the aquarium, the zoo, the nice atrium.
Yeah.
That's much better, right?
And then getting better after that.
Yeah, isn't it much better than the long corridor, the white tiles, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a very intense project trying to fix that, because that's a mindset of a generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're taking it on project.
Well, it wasn't mine, but, you know, it was really good, yeah.
Absolutely.
We did a smaller scale, you know, my colleague did the Starship Children's Hospital ED change of, you know, the whole ED, just the front reception, and made a difference. And I had a personal experience on that. It's quite interesting. So when you go to ED, the model care supposedly, they're all like this now, but in the past we're talking about 20 years ago, it's slightly different. So you're supposed to be seen by a triage nurse, and the nurse look at you and think, because urgent, call someone, or you can wait, right? So 20 years ago, when I remember bringing my son there and there, that you go through the reception first, which is before the triage. So when the parents are freaking out about if my child is going to die or what, they're typing in your address, where is your thing. So that's anxiety and stress and people yelling across the counter. You've seen that, I've seen that. But we flip it around, go back to, you see the triage nurse first with the whole, that kind of triage desk first before the reception, then change a lot because people know that your children will be seen first before you actually do the administration work. It's just even little things like that, with the color, with the kind of custom-made furniture and sort of designy furniture makes things different. And then they, some sponsors put in those digital walls, and so the kids were just playing with the walls, digital walls and stuff. That actually makes a difference. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of your biggest insights apart from? So you talked about user experience and how you're really making this space a lot richer and a lot more suitable for people to, well, in some cases accept bad news, in other cases get better. What are some of your biggest insights from the industry outside of the healthcare space?
What do you mean,
So when you think about design in general, what are some of the principles that you can take from healthcare design and generalize that across to, for example, housing projects?
Okay, so to me, the insight, and I think the key thing is if we're designing for the end user, who's the person that will be, who are the people that we're actually designing for? I think that's the key thing. So if we're designing space for, say, school, the end users is not just the people paying for the school or the ministry, but also the children, right? So how's the environment going to impact on a child going to that space, right? And if you're designing for a house, the end users are obviously people that's using the space. So what's the best? Is it any cultural thing? Is it any kind of cultural insight, or how people live their space, how people use their space? I think to me, it would be universal across, across any kind of design. It's who are the end users? What are you designing for? How are you going to design for them? Mm-hmm. That's the key. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is this attitude common across all these countries that you've worked in? Would you say there's a focus on end users? And, well, is there a focus on end users in New Zealand in general, or is that just the way you and Chow approach it? And then Hong Kong, Singapore?
I suppose in New Zealand we have the luxury of space. And we also, because life in general is not as hectic as a lot of Asian countries, that kind of crazy competitiveness is kind of lesser in a certain degree. And I think because of that kind of lesser stressed or intensity of people interaction, people generally think for other people more. You know what I mean? It's terrible to say that, but you know what I mean? And you have moments of thinking what's better for other people or what's better. And I think in general, we talk about human experience more in New Zealand. When I was working in Hong Kong, obviously it was a long time ago, it was a lot of about, functionality. And if you're doing developer stuff, it's all about money. And I think that's all the same in a lot of places. When I was, I didn't work in Singapore. I had an interview, and I did actually my thesis on Singapore and South Africa at that time, sort of comparing the thing. They have evolved a lot, and they've actually done a lot of amazing spaces. I think they also have a lot more focus on design and spaces that people use, rather than just quick. So I think,
right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, because Singapore is, if you were to think about a city with a lot of people packed into one place, Singapore would be one of the top examples of that. The country is a city.
But they are. it's interesting because they've got a very different kind of governance.
Yeah.
And it's not just the government, the people, the culture. They all sort of almost like harmoniously all gel into one.
Yeah.
So
Well, they have to.
Yeah, but that's how actually things get done faster in some way. And also there are part of the thing about their money is the way that their funding works. I don't want to comment too much on that, but they've got something like Kiwi Saver, but they have higher percentage. But that's also the government can actually utilize it, for things, and so I think it's a bit silly sometimes in kind of those kind of funding that we say maybe in New Zealand or some other country, it's just the money just sit there, right? Actually, the money should be utilized better. Let's not go into politics, but that's another story. Yeah.
When you talked about like bigger cities and having a hustle and bustle, that speaks really well to at least the experiences that I've had, because we're doing a project out on Great Barrier Island at the moment, and it was so interesting going there for a few weeks and seeing people leave their doors unlocked, neighbors do things for each other.
Crazy, it's amazing, though.
You have to look after each other because you're the only ones that are there. But then if you go to the other extreme, from like 400 people on an island to a city like Mumbai or New York, people all of a sudden get a lot more paranoid because you have to be, and rightfully so. There's so many people trying to take advantage or game the system, and that shows into spaces that are of, I guess, high consequence, like a healthcare situation, or when you're competing for projects. And I guess on one side you get the benefit of efficiency and getting things done quick, whereas on the other side you might be a bit laid back, but you get people caring about you a bit more.
I know, but on the other hand, it also does help. How do I put it? This is actually crazy. I mean,
well, Singapore's a good balance between them. I just had to add, and you were saying it does help that.
Yeah, well, I think it's the kind of government policies and everything, and it's a whole holistic thing, but also the infrastructure. They've done it very well. Like the railway station, the railway system. Or in Hong Kong in terms of underground train, they just go to everywhere. And then you don't have to wait for bus. 1 minute it's all here, and then I think that efficiency. But then because of how you maintain those spaces, and it's very clean. The MRT, I think in Singapore it's called, in Hong Kong it's called MTR, is all very clean. So it's light up, clean, lots of people going, you feel actually quite safe. So that's sort of impact on how human behavior, right? Because, I mean, there's no personal space, you're like close with that, people looking, but you feel okay. Whereas if you imagine if that space design is a bit sort of run down, dodgy, and you have people right there next to you, be like, why am I there? It's quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
How would you compare Singapore? What were your findings when you compared Singapore to South Africa?
That was many, many years ago. Yes. So the topic that I was comparing was a bit sort of too extreme, because Singapore was a top-down system, how they provide housing. Don't forget, this whole thing was about affordable housing. So they were a top-down way of doing it. So I think at that time the stakes was like 87% of people actually living government-built, constructed, provided housing, but they rent, and then it's like paying the mortgage, and then they actually own the house. It's quite different from here, just rent forever. Whereas in South Africa at that time, because it was just after the downfall of apartheid policy, and a lot of the things are bottom up from the ground, that people what they need, and from slum area to squatter area, and how they provide housing. So it's sort of comparing the two kind of extreme situations. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that has an impact on how people. Obviously, if you have a house and you're able to provide for your family, that impacts how you show up in society and so on and so forth down the line.
You are very smart. That's exactly right. That's part of the thing about, I think, the Singapore policy was, which is rightly so, especially for Asians, they always think that you fix your family and then you look out and you do more, for the community, for society, or whatever, for the country. So I think for them is once you fix the housing issue, things will get, like it will fall into place in that sense. So imagine a society that everyone own a house, regardless of how, it's the same as mortgage. You own a place, then you can go back, you can, like what you say, come back with a place that's safe, and they're trying to create community within the different sort of districts. And then kids go to school in the same place, and then you have family support network. In a way, you can say social engineering, but in a way, actually it worked. So, yeah.
Well, there's a common saying that says it takes a village to raise a child, not just a parent. So, so I guess to some level, I have to admit I don't know too much about Singapore's social network or their social engineering, but it seems like it's working.
Yeah,
at least from the outside.
We can talk about that, as a separate thing, because it's sort of quite different, But I mean, I think in society, everything else in the world, nothing is perfect. If it's working well for that particular group, you have to give it credit, And in Western country, may go, oh, this is really strict. Why are they doing this? And why are they doing this? Okay, but then you have another extreme is everybody has a say, and then you got nothing done.
Yeah, it's what suits the culture at that time.
And I think also the scale,
yes,
because they've got that many million people. It's not billions, and a quite confined kind of country space, It's not like it's a city, so it's easier to implement a lot of policies. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's take this to a more sober topic for a conversation, project delivery.
Yeah.
You've worked on many projects from concept to completion, a lot of them very big scale projects and a mix of some smaller, more intimate projects as well. You were telling me about...
the toilet.
Yeah, the public toilet just earlier. How do you ensure that your design integrity survives through all of the stages that the project goes through? I think, at least for a student, it's easy to see how you might do that at a smaller project where you might be one of the only designers involved in it, so you can advocate for things. But if it's a bigger $400 million project, for example, and there's hundreds of people involved, government regulation, council, approvals and consents, how do you make sure that intent, we can call it the meerkat intent, how do you ensure that survives all the way through to the end?
I think it's very important that the brief is set well and agreed. And a project vision has been all agreed, and people share the vision, right? Say, for example, if this Melbourne one with the meerkat, I would sort of envision that someone bought into this, and then they would, no matter how many value management, they were still saying that as a good thing, we sign on this is the right thing to do. So I think that's something like that. So it comes from the client. They have to buy into that vision, and the design team had to stick with it. If projects were 10 years, stick with that. Why? And go back to why did we do this in the first place? And then there will be a lot of iteration about cost saving and value management, and how do you make sure when you go back every single time you do it, you go back to why did we do this, and what are the things that you cannot change? What are the things that you could change? I think that sort of go back to iterations of making sure that it's, like, say, for example, a project which is not a big one, but it was maybe, I can't remember, 15 mil or something. It's an internal refurb in Auckland Hospital that was integrated short ward. And so I've got this idea that actually I saw it from a European design about family space. So that was a tension from Auckland Hospital that they want more patient beds. But the whole new research showing that rehab doesn't just happen in the gym, that they got a 15-minute session and then that's it. Rehab is a whole lifestyle stuff. So we introduced this one concept called living room space. So that means outside if you imagine there are the bedrooms, outside the bedroom there's a big space in the middle. The family can help the patient coming and doing small rehab work, maybe just like a finger work or some sort of like rehab thing. But that space, that living space, would take up bed space if you think about it, right?
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off. But then that actually enable family to come and spend time with the patient. That actually lighten the workload of the physio or the nurses. And then they feel like they can sit there and have a cup of tea or something. And so that intent was the first thing in the concept we all agree on. No, sorry, we don't all agree on in the first place because obviously they had pressure about the number of beds, but we had a few iterations and understanding the concept, and then we all stuck with that. Okay, so in between the things, stop and start, especially during COVID that was building it, there was a lot of tension about the number of beds again. But then you always go back to say, hold on, this is what we agree, and this is actually a positive clinical outcome, right? And so the client was good, go back to that, and okay, and then we move on. It's always constant pressure because it's the floor areas, why using this, what is it beneficial, what is it really a clinical outcome. But then if you have research backing up, you have evidence, to show that it will work, yeah, then you can just push through.
Is there constant review of research literature on your end as well? So you being the design expert, would it be you and your team that goes through some of this research, or do you consult, perhaps look at previous examples? What's the process behind that?
Okay, there's quite a few different things. They call evidence-based design, but actually, in terms of clinical design, in terms of health design, that's actually still lacking. But there's a lot of, looking at design precedent, or design from international outcome. And sometimes with a bigger project, you have clinical health planner, which is like clinical base. And they look at a functional design brief, they look at model of care, all these things. So a lot of times we're responding to that as well. Like say, for example, this model of care says, kind of whole patient journey, how you do. So then you sort of look at, okay, how can we create spaces to actually enable the outcome? Yeah, there's a lot of research, but also we're not alone because there are clinical people that would help, and there are literature out there, and also there's an American organization, there's an Australian organization, New Zealand organization, like health design organization, so you can actually tap into that kind of things. But there's no difference when you say, for example, if you are designing a university, you have to understand the whole pedagogy, how they actually teach, you have to do research on that, but you have people that actually have done a lot of research that can back you up. So you never work in isolation. You never be like a superhuman being or super architect. I can resolve everything. It never work like this. It's always a team, but you have to be aware of these things exist. Yeah.
So you're not just going off a hunch. Obviously, it's high consequences and so many people involved.
Yeah, I wish I could, like a frame area. I just want the shape,
You crumple a piece of paper and then
it doesn't work that way. No.
What makes part of a good design brief? You said that was critical. How does it deliver?
Very good question. I think I actually find it quite interesting. Sometimes, I suppose, because I've got sort of a bit of hay fever. I think if you look at so we have functional design brief, but I think what a good one is in the front end, actually why did they do it, the purpose of doing this, and a bit of a vision. Then you get into the functional stuff. Then you develop the schedule of accommodation, what's space. And that thing in the front end is actually quite robust when you have a shared vision and purpose of doing that. And that actually, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but actually it's a very good brief from that point. So obviously with clinical stuff is, from their clinical services plan, the model of care, that actually forms, if that is really intact, they know exactly what they want, they actually help with the flow and effect. To give an example, when we were doing Christchurch Waipapa, the ICU team, so I was the health planner for the ICU team of people, and that clinical director and his team, they're very, very sure and they're very clear what they wanted to achieve, and they go down to the thing about how their staff looked after the patient, how they wanted the patient's family to be involved, and that kind of stuff. So the vision was very clear, and the the spatial requirement then become very clear. Then the layout become very clear. Do you know what I mean? So everything's very, very clear, and then it's actually quite. It was one of the best I have to say, one of the best user group experience I had, because everyone was talking about almost the same language, and everyone was trying to sort of, because it's a highly functional in intensive care, right? But everyone sort of know why are they doing it, and then everyone accept the compromise that some of the stuff you can't be done. And it was actually quite a nice journey. We have the user group was quite fun, and we have laughter, we have things, and that was because they got a very clear vision and purpose. Even with, and I actually sometimes think about these people because they are day in, day out with intense looking after people, intense work, but it's just fun people. I think that actually kept them going. And it was really good. And I think the clear brief, the brief, a very good brief, it's actually they have to understand the purpose why they're doing it, and they have to share the vision, and then things will just flow on. Yeah.
So the aspirational part of the brief, the front end, I'm actually going through this process right now with AD1 at the moment. The first task is spend the first 3 weeks designing a brief, which is due next Tuesday, which I haven't made too much progress on. But I'd love to know what a big part of it for us as well is the aspirational content. So Pep's very insistent on that. You need to have an aspirational brief for, in our case, Britomart over the next 50 to 100 years, whatever your time frame is, as well as the more specific uses of the building site and what that closer site area looks like. But I was wondering, when you're designing the aspirational elements of a healthcare brief and thinking about user experiences and spaces and what are the qualities, how exactly do you decide that with the team? So are you sitting in a room together, chatting it through, or does it involve like the senior project architect going through and then presenting? What's that process?
It's really different because, I mean, in healthcare, because of the rigid kind of requirement, a lot of it's sort of like, they've got it before they involve the architects, which we're trying to say, if you actually get further up, earlier involvement is much better. But if you've got a student project, you think about yourself as an end user or yourself as a client. What is your vision? What do you actually want to see in 15, 20? Actually, what do you want to see? But may not even be a kind of tangible thing in terms of building or something. But I think it's more like what do you want to see in a kind of emotional context in a way, almost like you could put a statement as like, everybody loves going to the Britomart. I don't know, I'm just sort of making it up on the fly. And what does it mean? What does it mean? I remember years ago we did, I was involved with someone else with doing some urban design projects, and it was like in South Auckland. And one of the things that he used this quite an interesting kind of technique about briefing and getting information to formulate a brief was he said like, it was, I'm trying to remember how it was about 20 years ago now, but he was saying about something like about, say if you are in the air balloon, you are one of those, and you look down to the city centre, what do you see? Okay, and then the balloon come down a bit, like maybe about 10 meters about, what do you actually see? And then when you land that, what do you actually see? They could actually help you with formulating a brief. It's quite interesting because when you're high up in the sky, you see buildings, tall or small, tall or low, and you sort of think about that in that sense. But when you are in the, sort of mid-air, you actually see the fabric of it. And what do you actually want to see? I think it was quite interesting was the community was involved, and some of the kind of emotional feedback wasn't, I want this one cafe, I want this. It's more like, seeing a group of people gathering, a lot of people feel safe to be in this space, a lot of activities, a lot of family walking on the street, that kind of things is your kind of maybe intangible or emotional thing, but actually forms a brief, it forms a vision, maybe I should say, the vision, then go down to the brief. That's that kind of thing. Whereas in some of the health project, it could be, you can actually do something, some of the visions quite simple but interesting. Say, for example, one of the vision is, or goals is better sleep in a hospital. That involve a lot of stuff. how the nurses operate, how the orderly come in or not. But that could be one line.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of research and a lot of things that actually make
And
that
it
happen.
bumps up the project cost. Right?
Yeah, but it's not just acoustic. It's actually down to the operational process and the management. Yeah, so it could be as simple as that. But for this project, what do you think you wanted to see?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I wasn't expecting me to be put in the spotlight today, but
it was a conversation.
I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a shot. I think having intense and meaningful activity in Britomart is quite important. Just through doing a bit of research, I came across this pedestrian layout map of Auckland that was planned, I think, over the course of the late 80s and early 90s. And people like Julie Stout, I believe Pip as well, were involved, and a whole list of other architects were involved in making Auckland a more pedestrian-friendly city. And what the map looked like was they left out Queen Street because it was quite controversial at the moment, so that's excluded from the map. But the streets across it were shaded in yellow, and it ended at the Civic on one end and the train station on the other, with a little offshoot to Britomart. And what you notice when you zoom out a little bit away from that map at a larger scale is that apart from these pedestrian areas, you've also got Spark Arena off to the side.
Yeah.
So you've got Spark Arena quite far out, Britomart a little bit disconnected, at least at the moment, and then this intense activity of the city. And what I thought of...
Moving a port.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, shouldn't have said that, but
that's happening.
Go for it, yes.
That's hopefully happening finally. But is effectively creating a reason for Britomart to be that a gathering space for a certain kind of activity, which at the moment leads towards more of a shopping and commercial destination. And finding an activity that brings and draws people towards the port areas, towards the areas that, starting from the next 5 years onwards at least, will be more of a cruise ship destination, and where people will come to use the swimming facilities if they're not too oily. but effectively having that intense cultural gathering purpose. And at the start, I was thinking along the lines of an opera or like, I guess just any sort of activity that draws people throughout the day. But I can show you some of my drawings for later on. At the moment, it's gathering more towards an activity that shuts off Quay Street, lifts boats out of the sailboats out of the ocean, drags them across, and they're sort of worked in this workshop area in a slit between two buildings as a performance almost.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I'm sure I'll regret mentioning that on the recording later on when I eventually change my idea.
But I think the whole thing could be a simple thing about when you actually set up meaningful activities, bringing people for meaningful activities in that space. So what is meaningful? What is memorable? I think it's not just meaningful, but memorable, right? And how do you then, from that, what is the flow on, Like, it's quite interesting you mentioned about like retail. Retail could be meaningful for someone, but a show could be more meaningful. I don't know, people are quite different. The transient people like students coming in and out may not be as meaningful in some way, but actually could be very meaningful for, if there's maybe space for forum, for discussion or for whatever, It's just like the European, squares. People come in and do things. It's quite different because they're sort of inward looking, but we've got the ocean, what do we do? But I think what I got from you, that people coming in, but meaningful activities, But think about also memorable.
I think that's a great way to put it, meaningful activities. Yeah, and like you said, they're different for different people. So how do you judge your different, I guess you could say, demographic or interest groups, and how do you make sure that that's all, well, at least there's something for everyone or for your target groups within.
And you also mentioned about the cruise ship, when they come in the city, people go around, how do they remember Auckland?
Yeah.
That's actually quite that line could actually expand to a lot of things. It's actually quite a key thing that you're thinking of, because you're thinking about the intangible more the activities than one type of building, one type of building is the people and the activities. That other thing you have it.
The thing about this brief is Britomart's the last thing that people who leave Auckland will see. So that's the final impression. The first impression is you enter before you experience the country, and then the last one before you leave. So that just that ups the stakes a lot more. And now I'm
Yeah.
feeling a lot more pressured. Thank you.
But it's quite interesting, for us too, like you go to Britomart. I mean, now with the other side of the viaduct, the areas feel so much more walkable and people can actually be there. But in the past, Kiwi will be like, why do I go to town? I go to the beach. But actually, you could go to town as it's water. No, and you're not sunbathing, but still, you can actually enjoy a day out, under the sun. So how do we actually make it work?
Yeah, well, 15 years ago, those were all oil storage and
Oh my gosh.
processing facilities.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it's not the case anymore.
Yeah. Cool. Good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about the practical execution of things.
Yeah.
Is there a list of skills that have made the biggest influence in delivering a project? Sort of, if you were to take all of your soft and hard skills and pick the 20% that have helped you the most over the years to execute it, let's say the ones that have been...
I would tell you one word: listen. Most people would say, what are you talking about? But especially in health, you need to listen. And when you listen, you actually interpret and you actually understand the people's requirement and something that people say or don't say, what actually is underneath. Then you can design to respond to what you hear, what you listen, what you actually understand. And that's actually really hugely important. Say, for example, people may complain about blah, 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 so many things, but actually the whole thing comes with, say, for example, because they didn't have enough sleep, right? And then you design a space to respond to that, and that's actually how, well, obviously with the operational stuff, to make sure that they, get a better sleep. And that's, you listen to, they may be complaining about a few things, but actually what's the underlying reasons that they're doing it. And listening to, because in New Zealand, I can say to you, the healthcare worker and clinicians are super human beings at making do's. They make do's because we don't have like glorious facilities, they make do's. But actually, when they make do's and they come across, things, they just make do and they forgot about, that's actually a better way of doing things. And then when you listen and they sort of go down deeper, there's actually, sometimes there's actually quite a good fix, easy fix, but changing some sort. May not be the architecture, but it could be an operational side of things, Don't know if you want to go down that route, but can bore you a bit. Like, say, for example, linen delivery. That's a lot of people have to change sheets, and it could be quite stressful because where did the linen come from? And then we have all this huge debate, honestly, I'm not joking, about the linen bay. Do you have a linen trolley to put it, or you have a linen trolley and you stack it into the shelf and, you think about that, but it's actually impacting the people that's working in there when they're changing sheets all the time, right? And of what with elderly, you need to change it even more.
So often, and something that you don't think about.
And so then what do we do? Do we have a bigger linen space closer to where they need it? And then you go back to how they actually supply the linen. So that's not architecture, but actually space can help them, or facilitate that kind of conversation to understand what they do. It's really funny. Every single time you go to hospital, no space for pillow. It sounds tedious, but it's actually super important for them. And I suppose when you listen, and then with your understanding and your experience, what the problem, define the problem by listening and by understanding, and then you can actually go for solution. I think a lot of designers and architects come in thinking that they know it, so without listening, because of course we do this and do this. Hold on, actually, there's nuances of people doing things and stuff and how they talk and stuff like this, and then you get it wrong. You spend a lot of money in providing something that you think will work, but actually you don't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the linen thing. Yesterday we were on a tour with Julie's class of some of the urban spaces in Auckland, and we were walking past a move-in pick building on Customs Street, and there was a linen truck, and it was just stacks and stacks of bed sheets and towels that had just been washed off facility to be brought back in, and like that sort of clicked when you said that. It's just all these processes that you don't think about.
No.
Or at least that's someone at my experience I wouldn't think about, that play such a key role. You can't have a patient who doesn't have a clean pillow to rest their head on.
I know, right?
Yeah. With these processes, how do you listen? When you say listen, I'm sure there's a list of, well, not a list, but just a series of activities that go on. So you might take in the information and then research more on certain issues, or maybe understand that the person who you're talking to is...
Yeah, it's just interesting when this is actually not an easy question to answer, because it depends.
Yeah.
Some, like, I suppose, like, it also have a difference. If I go to private, they have a key person coming allocated for discussion. They know what to do. They run the units, blam, blam, bam, bam, bam. That's how we do it. And because of efficiency that they wanted, that may be kind of not so much room for negotiation in a way, because then this is how they do it, and this is like not a factory, but like the production line or their logistic is that way, and then you listen to more like the process, how do they do it, and then you get it. In public, sometimes because their model or their things are not as clear, even though this is a unit doing this thing, but you mixed up with so many different things that you do because you make do, especially in sort of like the provincial town. One thing actually, as I said, the clinicians are superhuman beings, especially the nurses. They're supposed to specialize in this, but they do all these different things, right? So I suppose if you talk about listening, first thing is when you do healthcare design, you go into a room, you do not think that you are above others, like the big A architects. We don't. Because the clinicians, every one of them are smart, right? You actually go in with a bit of a humility that they know better than you. It sounds a bit strange, right? They do know better than you in terms of how they use the space, how they actually want to function. But the skill is to listen, and how do I listen to actually understand what they're saying into a tangible, a physical environment that we can design and give back to them to provide or enhance what they're doing. I think that's the trick. How do you link that operational or clinical or healthcare, whatever element, into a physical delivery? Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a big part of your role is also being a professional problem solver, just being able to condense all of that intense information and find the most, I guess, in a way, elegant design solution to it. What's the best way you can solve these problems without getting too overbearing?
Yeah, but as I said, it's never alone. So with some bigger projects work, as health architects, and we have a clinical health planner that come with me. And so they could ask some questions that we won't ask. Yeah. We won't be able to ask, because when you talk, like say for example, it's really, really interesting. I remember like, this space is always full. We got all jam packed. We don't have enough, and blah, blah, blah. And then some people, if they work in a hospital, they would go, hold on, how do you schedule that space? Are you just busy at 9 to 9:30? What about 12 o'clock? Is it busy? And then suddenly unlock a few things. It's like they're busy for 1 hour of the day. Mm-hmm. And then they claim to be busy because they're all there. So hold on, can you schedule your work and your patient appointment to different timing? Then that space is actually adequate. I wouldn't be able to ask the question if I hadn't got the experience or didn't know how their workflow is different from how we do it, right? So you wouldn't have asked that question if someone actually wasn't experienced enough, or actually asked the right question when they actually been working in that kind of system before. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like sometimes you just don't know what you don't know to be able to ask the right questions.
Yes.
Having those people around.
Yes.
Can you talk to me about the differences between sort of the larger projects that you mentioned, where you've got so many consultants and people in projects that can be up to $300, $400, $500 million versus the public toilet? Do you approach them differently?
Of course, of course. I suppose basic principles are the same, but you approach it differently because the program timing. And the kind of scope is very different. Say for the public toilet, we have a couple of people that it's patient toilet in the public space in the hospital, just upgrading it, you know. So it could be just interior designer and me go and talk to the project manager. What do you want? You know, do you think this? And then we give them a bit of options, and then they bring it to their users. How that would work, that wouldn't work, and then we just do something like, you know, as simple as that, more like a house renovation, you know, that kind of stuff. Whereas with the bigger scale project, because even the consultation period could be months, and then you have consultants and design process years before you started putting on site, then it's very different how you structure how you deliver the project. And because more people involved, and we do also try to use that process to train up our grads as well, so that we bring them into meetings and making sure they were there and listen to the staff. So it's quite much more intensive in terms of planning, milestone dates where you deliver. So you're always on the edge, you know,
It's a bit more structured.
More structured. And with a lot of public projects, not just healthcare, is a time for approval as well. So how do you actually making sure the approval process go well? What kind of documentation that you can facilitate, you know, you provide to facilitate that?
It's probably a race as well to that date, I'm guessing, and then you hit submit, and then for a couple seconds you're like, oh, that's good, and then on to the next project.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a marathon.
Yeah.
Marathon running. Yeah.
What are the most rewarding bits for you? Why do you do this? Why are you still in architecture after so many years?
Obviously, you know, effectively, firstly, I wanted to be an architect since I was 13. And I know my son calls me, he thinks I'm really weird. How do you know what you want when you're so young? Yeah. I just did. And if you ask me, if you ask me to go back and choose again, I'll do the same thing. Maybe we'll do it more effectively, you know, if I know what I wanted, you know, in terms of exactly, you know, the type of project, maybe slightly different, but it's in the kind of path, I think I've chosen the right one. So why is it rewarding? Why it keep me going? I think, as I said, it's all about people. And healthcare project is very, very demanding. It's crazy. But I think the impact that we have on people is a lot more than a lot of other types. You know, like say retail. Retail could be, I'm not sort of saying what is better, what's not, but say for retail, experience is, that's a experience, But if a healthcare experience could be a experience that actually impacts on you and your most vulnerable time in your life, it could be actually really happy, like birthing unit, you know, having a baby, you know, that's memorable. But it could be sending off a family, you know, in a palliative care environment, right? So these are very significant moments in your life, and these are the things that architecture may be the backdrop, maybe just a backdrop, but that actually, the kind of profound impact of the environment or what we design actually affects those people. It's something that I hold quite close to myself. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite? Well, let's say this. What's your preferred budget range for projects to be working on? I remember earlier you mentioned a specific range. Can you talk more about that?
For me, it would be 50 to 100 million. Because you got the scale, you got the structure, but at the same time, you got a bit of wiggle room to do a few things. And also, I'm always about mentoring younger generations. That's that kind of project actually can bring up people to come in, and you have kind of a bit of leeway to bring people in learning and experiencing different things. So I think that's actually quite a good size project for me. Whereas like the 200 or the 300, it's just 10 years, like 5-10 years could be quite long. Even a 100 mil would be like 5 years. But I think that's sort of, I think I'm just getting a bit impatient. Sometimes I want to see something. So I think to me the 50 to 200 is quite a good size for me personally.
And then the payoff for what keeps this profession rewarding with a big project. Like you said, it's 10 years. It's such a slow burn. You know it's going to be worth it, and you know it's going to impact so many people's lives. But God, I've only been doing this for a few years. I can't imagine you've done that so many times over.
I know, especially the younger generation these days. You got everything is instant. Imagine saying, "Yash, tomorrow can you embark on a journey with me or a project for 15 years? One project." You'd be like, really? Do I want to do it,
Do I even want to be an architect?
Exactly, right. So it's actually, I was thinking it's actually quite hard, especially, for the younger people trying to sort of, when we've got a couple of grads working with a bigger project for us, so I have to make sure that we got some smaller project for them. So one young girl, one young woman, so she's doing a big project, but I've actually give her a smaller projects that's just started on site, and I said to her before that, I said, you're the project lead. I'm just going to the meeting with you, supporting you. And I talked to her about a few things, and she goes, gosh, I'm actually quite scared now. I said, no, don't be nervous. And she planned what the questions to ask. And I actually, obviously, we brainstormed and talked to her the first kickoff meeting, what question you need to ask, blah, blah, blah. So written it down. So the day in the meeting, I said, well, you're leading it. I'm just in the background. Obviously, I chip in and ask a few questions. And to encourage her, and said to the team that she looks young. She's just an Asian as well, actually. From I think she's Fijian Indian, but she's born here. She's quite looking young, but actually she's experienced, And so give her a bit of kind of this rewarding or satisfaction in running her thing while doing a big project. Because imagine if it's all spreadsheet for 15 years. Don't know if
just takes it out of you, and then you begin to question why you even started to do all of that.
That's right. Yeah.
That's fair. The teaching thing sounds very interesting because you've been doing it for a while, and you just did a semester at Unitech the previous semester, so the second half of last year. What are some of the biggest takeaways that you've had, or what are your lessons learned from that? Why do you continue to teach?
Well, actually, I've been teaching on and off, just and because our company also has been doing some sort of Unitech studio years ago, and I had one time in Auckland we did a studio, and then just coming and doing a guest, as guests, practice management, stuff like this.
But you keep coming back.
Yeah, I know, because I think I actually, to be honest, I thought you guys is amazing and brave, because in this day and age, people want it instant. I've got a young son as well. It's like everything is like in instant. People was doing architecture, young people doing architecture thinking about 5 years, or medicine, 6-7 years. I think firstly, thumbs up to you guys, commitment. And this day and age, this is like, 5 years is it's a big thing, right? So I just thought that, I think that's a commitment. And then I think it's on us in an industry, people that's been here for longer, should be able to sort of give you guys some encouragement and also support for people who wanted to embark onto this crazy journey, right? So that's one thing. And I think a lot of people that, who wanted to do 5 years, and actually there's something in you guys that's passionate and wanted to carry on. And I think we owe it to you guys to actually wanted to help and to support, and, wanted the architecture industry, to have people coming in, doing the right thing. And I wish in my time if there are more people actually come and speak to us about the experience and do things that may actually help us to choose the right thing, or actually cut short of the journey, or actually make a journey much more enjoyable rather than you just go and stumble onto this thing and that thing. So I think that's actually, to be honest, I think we owe it to you guys, who's committed to do this. And then actually it's very rewarding in a way that when people speak of your passion and you want to do, like architects, architecture, and during the year, you think you go out and rock the boat and change the world. It's amazing though, because that's something that's sort of like, gosh, yes, actually we did it before. We thought about that before. Why didn't we do it? It's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you were very active in the mentorship circle and with events, and and you're here today, so thank you very much. What about that bit? Or let's say, have you always been involved in the greater community in architecture, or has this been something that you realized towards the later parts of your career, where you say, I've got enough experience to now go and teach other people? Do you understand? So what I'm trying to ask is, at least when you first start off doing architecture, it may be a bit of an imposter thing where you say, oh, I want to get involved, but I don't know if I know enough yet to be able to give back on my experiences. Sure, I'm a few years ahead of people who have just started out, but...
I think everyone's got something to offer, regardless of experience or how many years in your industry. So to give you an example, I remember I only first graduated, I was still in 4th or 5th year. So someone that I come across, I didn't even know that person well, but she was doing some science stuff, and she was smart. And she said something about, she's actually very creative, but she's quite scared of doing creative stuff in architecture or something. I don't know how the conversation, I said, hold on, actually, she was in first year university. I said, well, at that time, we still have an intermediate year before you go to a professional year. And I said, well, why don't you use all your credits to actually go into architecture? And I was only like 4th year or something. And she said, why? She said, I could do it, but this is quite scary. But I was sort of like encouraging her. I said, well, regardless of what you do, the architecture school experience, the things that you're learning, the critical thinking or the broaden your horizon, is still very good for you if you come up and not become an architect, whatever. And then she actually ended up, she actually now is one of the directors in a company. But the interesting thing is, even when I was very young, I've learned something, and my experience, I've got something to offer to another person who's actually seeking direction. I think everyone's got something to offer. Obviously, when you are older and more experienced, I think it's not just that we got something to offer, but also, I think, as I said, it's responsibility, and we owe it to the younger generation should offer something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing about architecture that I think is so special, is that because it's such a slow burn and so difficult at the start, oftentimes the people who are a lot more experienced, or hopefully when our group gets to that stage, you tend to want to give back to people who are at the start of their journey. So we're doing a project on Great Barrier at the moment, and we just started talking to people about, hey, what do you think we should do in this case? Is there someone that we should talk to, people to get advice from? And we've gotten so much support left, right, and centre, because people, I guess, recognise that if you're someone who is that dedicated to get something done or be involved in a way, then it's worth it, me giving you my time and effort.
Exactly.
It's just something so beautiful about that space, which I don't think a lot of other industries have. I think in a lot of other industries, it can tend to get a bit more competitive. It can tend to get, hey, we're all, out for the same slots, but...
There's still some like that, still some element of it. But you're right, I think it's recognising people embarking on this journey, it will be a long journey. It's not just a job, right? It's your vocation or your life. So I think people will be much more willing to contribute. Yeah.
When you say that, that sounds scary, saying that it's a long journey. But also inviting in a way, it's
but
a lot of
I
potential.
think it's like people say, for example, people are teachers. Gosh, I cannot be a teacher because it's whatever you do. Honestly, you think about So you can actually say everything's quite scary. You know, if you're a teacher, especially like the younger kids teacher, you could actually shape or impact on their life without knowing or with intention. You know, it could be very, very positive. It could be negative, you know, and what you do. But do you not do it then? You know, and I think a teacher is a vocation as well. I just, you know, some amazing teachers that's impacted in my life, you know, and some not so good ones that's, oh, you know, some people can't get over it, right? So do you not do it? I think it's the thing is asking yourself if you believe in what you're doing, you just carry on. And I don't think you should look at, can I hang in there for another 15 years? I think you just do it one step at a time, one day at a time. You'll get there. I mean, I finished in 1992, 93. Yeah. It's like a long time.
Yeah. Who have some of your mentors been through the years? Who are some of the people that have impacted you that perhaps, you know, if I wanted to go off and read their works or talk to them?
Well, obviously my mentor in the health space is, you know, actually my colleague. He, you know, used to be a director of the company, and Darryl Carey. He founded the New Zealand Health Design Council, and you know the way that he approached things and working with people, the left and right brain, how it works together, and spending a lot of time, you know, to let me do my own thing, and rather, you know, sort of put the hands off and giving me support when I need it. That is a, you know, kind of huge mentor. And also, I have to say, in you know, doing sort of like later stage in my, you know, career, you know, and doing architecture, women's, you know, Lynnie Naismith, she is a very good mentor because she came from a time that, you know, it's much more difficult for women to be making a mark, you know, and she's always quite level-headed, you know, the difficulties we've gone through, you know, with the organisation or, you know, changes, you know, she's always been there. You know, she's another, you know, worth mentioning people. And I actually have to say I come across a lot of really good people mentoring, you know, a lot of good people that are genuinely care for you. One of the lecturer here used to be, I've lost touch. I don't know if he's still, he certainly would have retired, but I don't know if he's, you know, still around. Hayden Willie, you know, he used to be the building services, you know, lecturer for, you know, but he had a huge impact on my husband. You know, my husband is graduated here as well, because he was helping him with other things. I mean, actually, it was quite interesting. We still kept in touch even when we were married. When we moved back to Hong Kong, came back, we're still in touch. It's just that kind of people actually value another person. That kind of may not be mentoring, but it's just a value that people share. But for me, there are a lot of mentors along the way. Yeah.
So if you were to do it all again and you were 18 tomorrow, after learning everything that you've learned from people and all of your experiences, what are you going to do? Anything different? What about things that you would do the same?
I have thought about that before, to be honest. At the moment, I mean, I love the whole health architecture space. But if I'm young again and redo it again, maybe what I would do, because when I graduated from my master's doing the house developing country, one of my classmates, she went straight into South America and did a lot of ground, you know, sort of ground research work and helping extreme kind of community to rebuild, you know, or to build a community. I should have jumped there. You know, when you're young and no family, maybe I should be braver and try that. I may still end up doing health because I wanted to come back to New Zealand, but maybe I should have spent some of the time instead of that 3 or 4 years in Hong Kong doing developer stuff, big project scale. Maybe I should have jumped there and do some really hands-on community consultation, getting my hands dirty and stuff. That may be something that I would always think, a question mark, maybe I should have done it. That would be, yeah.
What would you give as advice for me looking at today's climate in architecture?
Oh gosh.
If I wanted a rewarding life, but also to do something of value, what would you advise? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I know. It's just hard because but I'm still a great believer that if you know what you want, you get it. Okay, so if that's architecture and a type of architecture that you think it's actually will contribute the best to your life and to the community, just go for it. Regardless of what, you will find a way. You may pivot along the way. Like, so for me, I wanted to do housing, for affordable housing, but actually pivot away. But because the skills are transferable, it's still very similar. Well, not similar, but very similar, in terms of the value. So I think I would actually, I know people would say that you're being unrealistic, but I think it's follow your passion, really what you wanted to do, and you just make a way, you will.
Right. So are you saying that I follow that that inkling, that feeling that, okay, this might be the path?
So I think there are people that really wanted to do design and focus on design and kind of the actual fabric of and it's actually a value in it, obviously. And some people are more people-focused, and you actually wanted to do things that may not be as architecture, but as actually people. I think that's something maybe that's sort of not a clear, but clearer kind of where do you want to go. Then what do you want to see maybe I'll say this way, if you are in architecture for 20 years, when you look back, what you actually would make you feel that I've done the right thing.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a very tough topic to have a conversation on because there's everything's so unclear about the future. But that makes a lot of sense.
But I drew something for myself at that time. I think I was in second year or third year. Someone was asking, what do you do in your life? What do you want? And I remember vividly, it was actually in a church setting. We're doing something, I can't remember what. And I actually drew a little sketch myself. What do I want to see in my life? And I actually did sketches with some sort of, it's a lot of people, like quick people with the architecture, person, and some houses around there. And it's almost like it was a community. So, and that sketch is, how do I build that community? That was a sketch that I had in my head, and that was what I go in that. So hospital actually, healthcare is actually a community provided contributing, that whole thing. So I think so you may, as I say, you may digress, you may do this, you may distract it, but actually that was the thing that I got for myself. And to quote another example, which is amazing. So a few years back, there was one guy called Dean Landy. He's amazing, crazy amazing. You should look at him up. I think I told you before. So he came to New Zealand. It was actually another church kind of setting, but he was talking about, so he's an architect, he's an urban designer. He runs his company in Melbourne, 150 people, oh my gosh. And he's now actually in Africa, the whole family. They're building 6 African cities.
City builders, wow.
So like planning and stuff.
Yeah.
So he's taking a bit of a sabbatical, what's it common, whatever, I don't know the arrangement from his actual company. And actually, so what he did, and he actually written a book about community, building community. So what struck me, that was a few years when he was presenting, he gave himself a mission statement. So he gave himself a mission statement about being architect, what he wants to create space, his community and things like that. And he followed that kind of mission statement. And then that's how he, yeah. And so, you can see that's why multi-unit housing developments, urban design, and building cities.
Yeah. That makes it sound a lot more promising, but it's still quite scary thinking about that mission statement, and it might change.
It might change.
5 years.
But that's why I think the mission
years.
statement have to gel with your passion and have to gel with your value. And even if it change, I don't think the mission statement will change, but it's the path and what you do may change, but you're still going to that same mission statement, right? Like I wanted to build for people. I want to build and create an environment for people. So health, affordable housing, or even if I have to do tertiary education, it's still building for the people. So that statement will not change in that sense. Do you know what I mean?
But just how that's realized,
Yeah.
or in your case, where that's realized.
Yeah.
If it's New Zealand or elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you were to do a dream project that hits every mission,
Oh my
every
gosh.
core value of yours, and drives straight to the mission statement, what is that? What would that be?
Wow. That's a very difficult question because I don't know. Because do I want to build in a hospital? Do I want to build, provide housing? Okay, I would. It sounds a bit sort of like, it's almost like a kind of a health precinct, but actually it could be, maybe I frame it as like hospital village. You know how I was saying to you about people coming to hospital, not just for treatment, so if that's an ideal kind of site, it would be even better to be integrated in the city. Memorable activities, people coming in, getting education, kind of so that you don't actually get to the route that you need acute treatment, like community education, understanding health and well-being, coming to get classes, to understand your well-being, community lectures and stuff like this, a space for exchange of ideas. Staff can meet families, family coming in with, coffee. That maybe I call it a hospital village.
Yeah, a community gets back to that.
Yeah.
It's that one sketch that you had from many years ago.
You inspire me too.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been such a beautiful conversation.
It was good, eh?
And I think we can wrap it up here. If people need to find you, how can they do that? Where do we get in contact with you?
I'm on the website of Chow Architects, and they can always email me, or I'm sure if your friends want to contact you, can put him or her through, or they through me. That's all good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you. It's good.